name is Aaron DeVore, and I am the chair in Transgender Studies and the host and sponsor of this event. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. So we are located at the University of Victoria in British Columbia in Canada, and we like to start with a territorial acknowledgement. And we acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I would also like to acknowledge that today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And in addition to the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust of World War II, 100,000 LGBTQ plus people were also arrested, and 15,000 were sent to the death camps, wearing the pink triangle that we now use as a point of pride. And we also remember them today. Before we start, I would like you to know a little more about the chair in Transgender Studies. And so please turn your attention to this short video.
The Trans Archive has been very much an eye-opener. The Trans Archive is very diverse, and it is such a rich body of work that is available.
Transgender Archive and training in Transgender Studies are a very special place for me. I hope every researcher about transgender have opportunity to come here. I don't have the same opportunity in Japan.
Yeah, the experience has been great. Everyone was really friendly when I was corresponding to get stuff set up for my visit. I'm gonna miss it. I don't want to leave.
We have nothing but curiosity to lead us forward. So first of all, just breathe curiosity.
Now let's turn to the main event. We have 3 special guests and special moderators as well for this event. And so first I'd like to introduce you to our moderators. Chase Joynt is an assistant professor in gender studies at the University of Victoria and the co-director of the film No Ordinary Man about jazz musician Billy Tipton. Cael Keegan is an associate professor at Grand Valley State University in Michigan and is author of the book Lana and Lily Wachowski, Sensing Transgender. Our panelists, I'm very excited to have them and welcome them as well as welcoming our moderators. Sam Fetter, who is the director of Disclosure and the writer and producer. Sam was cited by IndieWire as one of the exciting trans filmmakers shaking up Hollywood. And while working towards a higher ethical standards in filmmaking, Sam's films explore the intersection of visibility and politics along the lines of race, class, and gender in trans lives. So welcome, Sam. Rain Valdez is an actress, a writer, and a producer. And Rain Valdez just made history as the first Filipinx-American transgender woman to be nominated for a Primetime Emmy in an acting category for her lead role in Razor Tongue, which she created and produced. Welcome, Rain. And Jen Richards, writer and actor. Jen Richards is an Emmy-nominated writer and actor known for the web series Her Story, Netflix's Tales of the City, and HBO's Mrs. Fletcher. So welcome, Jen. So I will turn it over now to the panel. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Michael. It is such a pleasure to be here. Sam, Jen, and Rain, welcome to our Zoom event. It is so nice to be in your company. We really, really appreciate your time and congratulations on such a beautiful film. So here we are in 2021 on Zoom, talking about a film that is finished and has been hustled and fundraised and community supported and vetted for so many years. And I'm hoping that we might start with a bit of a bookended portrait of the project, Sam, where you thought you were when you began and where you've arrived. And perhaps Jen and Rain could reflect on your journey with the film and all the ways that you got here.
Thank you, Chase. And hi, everybody. Rain, Jen, and Cael. It's so nice to see all your faces. And you, Vic, and Aaron, thank you so much for organizing this and hosting this. It's always such an honor to be in such fine company. Actually, tonight is the year anniversary of our Sundance premiere.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
What?
Oh my God.
Wow. No,
I think you're wrong. I think that was 5 years ago, Sam. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, actually, you're probably right. 5 years, 5 days. I don't know. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what to do with that, but I can have a moment. I started this film, the first moment I thought about it. Okay, there were 2 moments that really kind of made me want to make this film. One was when I saw the photo of Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine in 2014, right? She's wearing that blue dress. She's looking defiantly down at the camera. The framing is so intentional. She's so empowered. And it says the transgender tipping point. And as a trans person, as an activist, as a filmmaker, I just was feeling so many different emotions at that time, right? I was excited because it's Laverne, and I had seen her work in New York as an advocate and writing columns in the Huffington Post, and I knew she would use this podium like far beyond what any of us could imagine. And at the same time, the community I was surrounded with were still disproportionately underemployed. You're 3 times more likely to be unemployed if you're trans in the nation, across the general population, 4 times if you're a trans person of color. Trans people still lack access to safe housing and healthcare, right? Trans women are experiencing, specifically Black trans women, are experiencing violence and death to epidemic proportions. Trans guys report to 50% of trans guys report attempting suicide at some point. So things, so there was this celebration of Laverne and the possibilities around mainstream attention. And there was also this deep fear of impending backlash. And at the time when this story hit the newsstands, mainstream media had barely acknowledged us, right? Let alone celebrate us. And here we were seeing non-trans people pat themselves on the back and get accolades for a rise in our visibility. So it was, you know, as a filmmaker, and you and I, Chase, talked about this at the time, like, what is our role in this? Because we know there's going to be backlash. We know the people we love and care about are going to be more vulnerable because of this. We were part of the generation to create images of trans people. What is our responsibility in this? And also, like, as filmmakers, how do we claim this moment for trans people, right? So imagining what kind of project could bring in as many voices and as much history felt like my responsibility. And it felt like it was a real important, looking for a word you use all the time, Chase, not to disrupt.
To intervene?
Intervene, it's one of your favorite words. I wanted to intervene in the moment, right? And say, hello, like, there's this history and we can tell it, right? You know, and then in 2015, when I saw I Am Kate kind of take over public conversation, at the same time Trump was getting popular around his candidacy. And so that was also a moment of, I don't know what's going to happen to our community. Like, the violence is just going to increase more and more and more. So it was that summer, I was actually in Brighton screening the Kate Bornstein film, that I talked to my friends around me and was like, would you be interested in a film like this? And then it started. You know, and the biggest thing between my plan at the beginning and where we landed was I naively thought that I could do the history of trans everything, right? Every type of media that existed, right? You know, film, TV, indie, Hollywood, comic books, news. I just thought, you know, and then that was very quickly dispelled. And so landed with Hollywood because I wanted to reach a mass audience that could this experience, right? That so many people have ingested these images over decades.
But if anyone wants to fund a 22-hour docuseries, Sam is ready to go.
I'm ready, and we're Zoom ready. Green screen, everything. We're good to go. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Sam. And it strikes me too that, you know, we all knew your film was in development for a long time. And so, Rain and Jen, I wonder if you might join us in conversation. When did you hear about the project? How did you get involved? Was there a time lag between those moments? Did it happen all at once? How did you arrive on screen?
Go ahead, Rain.
Well, I think maybe the first time I heard about it or knew anything about it, I think, Jen, maybe it was at that Outfest trans panel that we were on. And Sam, I think there was a short film, yes, of Disclosure, something like that. And I remember Zachary was a keynote speaker, and then I saw like a short film version of what Sam's idea was. And that was pretty early on. I think it was like maybe 2016 or something, or 2015 maybe, I don't know. But but I was really shocked at that time. I remember it was just images of images that just came at us at the audience, and it was very memorable. And I remember seeing things that I hadn't seen before, and then I remember seeing things that were much more today. And so that was the first time I knew of it and heard of it. And I got to know Sam since then, and was invited to be a part of it. And, you know, it was an immediate yes for me, because I don't know much about my history as a trans woman. And much of it has been erased, which is something that I've learned over the years, like purposely erased. Like, even having been born in the Philippines, learning how prior to colonization, trans people, non-binary folks were kind of viewed as the spiritual leaders of the islands. But then when colonization came, and, you know, they sent a priest, they murdered all the trans people because they wanted to indoctrinate all the Filipinos into Catholicism, and that's what happened. So and that's something that I've just learned recently, and, you know, I'm learning about how film and TV is kind of been doing the same, and it's just like this never-ending cycle. And so I thought that this documentary was an opportunity to sort of bridge that gap and start that conversation and figure out a way to start changing that landscape, because I really truly believe that it's still just the beginning. Disclosure is just like the beginning of the conversation. It's just a tipping point still. But I'm glad that it's out there, and it's so crazy that was a year ago that happened at Sundance. I didn't even think about that, but I still have conversations about it like it was yesterday, because people have access to it now, which is amazing with it being on Netflix. And so it's changed for me. It's changed how I talk to people, where there's people approach me about it and will say something about disclosure, and there's a little bit of a relief because I can speak on my experience without having to explain so much, which is kind of great.
Yes, I was friends with Sam when he was doing the Kate Bornstein movie, and so was a part of the conversation from the very beginning. And then Sam started doing some preliminary research interviews where it was very informal, and he would sit with subjects and basically talk about what kinds of media depictions we remembered and what kind of impact they had on us and the ways that we had internalized it. And it was a very free-flowing conversation. I think it was one of like 70. How many did you do in that initial set?
I filmed about 60 of them, but I did a lot of informal, like over the phone. So they're about 90.
And mind you, this is pre the film. This is just Sam gathering information and trying to figure out what the narrative is, where the gaps are, what needs to be said, what should be part of it. Him kind of honing in on his thesis. And then so when it finally started moving forward, I was absolutely on board from the very beginning, and sat for him actually twice for the movie, kind of a good distance apart. I know that like even in the movie, my hair is this length in one scene and like this length in another. So I know it's a pretty good gap apart. And it is absolutely surreal to think that it was 1 year ago that we were all together and premiered at Sundance. And I want to echo what Rain said. It's hard to overstate the impact the film has already had on the industry. I could name a dozen examples, but one that was particularly dramatic shortly after the movie had come to Netflix and it was available to everyone. I had what in the industry is called a general, which is I was sitting down, in this case, with all of the casting executives of a major network, like 7 of them from all across the country, for us to get to know each other. And typically when I had these generals over the last 5 years in Hollywood, the first 20 minutes would basically be me kind of catching everybody up on trans representation. Here's where we're at, here's why it matters, here's what we need, and just trying to open people's minds and push them a little bit further along progress on trans representation. And so I was all geared up to do this with this particular meeting. And immediately one of them said, "Oh, we love disclosure. We all saw it. We're all obsessed with it. We get it." And I was like, oh, wow. Like this is a completely different conversation now. It speeds everything up. It puts us on equal footing. And I'm going to gush about the film a lot over this panel. Part of what it does so well, it both implicates the industry, but also provides room for growth and provides an opportunity to do better. Really kind of holds people to account and trust that they can do better. And I think the industry is responding in kind because of it.
I agree. I think the film raises so many interesting, big questions about where we go from here, and is a kind of calling in versus calling out structure in terms of the participation that trans audiences want from the industry. And it also raises really interesting questions about kind of what we do with the past record of representation, right? Like one question Chase and I were kicking around when we were talking about this conversation was like, related to what Rain said about purposeful erasure, that like do we just kind of hit delete on Silence of the Lambs? Like what do we do with this older archive of like that's used throughout the film to tell a story about what we want to move past? And there's this really interesting moment where Laverne Cox says, you know, growing up as trans, watching these images, you develop a certain kind of critical awareness because you're watching images that you know are not your life, and yet cisgender people think they are. And we were having a really interesting conversation about like, what does it mean generationally for younger trans people to maybe be coming up in a world where the same kinds of media literacies are not going to be required of them? Like, so what do we do with all that bad representation? Do we delete it? Do we cancel it? Like, what do we do with it? I'm so curious what you think.
Are you endorsing cancel culture right here?
No. For anybody who might want to speak on that, I'm just really curious what you think as makers.
Maybe as a way to set the stage for the answers to this question, Cael and I can disclose that we love bad objects. Like we have a lot of back channeling about really contested hot button trans films, you know, and their use value.
I think we're all just being polite. I think we all have stuff to say, but I think you're going to have to ask specific person.
You should probably call on people individually, because we're all going to wait for someone else to go first.
I maybe back to Sam for this, just to do a round robin, but then whoever else might want to jump in. Yeah, really curious. Yeah. Chase and I both love Boys Don't Cry for complicated reasons. So,
I mean, the idea, you know, I'm certainly going to be the first person to speak up if I have an opinion. Like if I have a lot of opinions, I have a lot of critique, obviously. I made a film about that. But to erase something from our history is not the answer. I mean, that almost feels gaslighting, right? Because I think having this document and showing what has led to a lot of the belief systems, the ideologies, the mythology around trans people. Of course, it's not only film and TV, but we can definitely see how it's greatly connected to that. To not see that evidence would make us feel like we're making it up. I mean, something that kept happening to me over and over when I was looking at these images, it was just, while horrifying, it was so validating. Like, oh, okay, now I understand why people think this or why I think this, right? Why this has been internalized so deeply, or why people actually think this is true, because they've seen it again and again and again. And, you know, I don't think anyone goes into this industry to intentionally hurt people, but we live in a system that unfortunately very quickly you get blindsided. Is that a bad term? You get, you know, you can't see past the bottom line. And so there's so much lazy creativity. So people are just start to resort to what they know, what they think works. And so to erase that from our history is to erase our reality. What we have to do is look at it within a context. You know, I think Yancey sets the film up talking about D.W. Griffith, right? And talking about Judith Bethulia, and that we wanted to talk about this transgressive character, but it's in the context of D.W. Griffith. Like, you can't not talk about this racist person who created stereotypes. You know, you just have to create, they have to have that context. We can't just pretend like Birth of a Nation didn't exist. I mean, it had huge political implications, right? It was seen in the White House. You can't pretend that didn't happen. So no, I just think there's a context that's essential. And media literacy, I mean, that's such a snore-fest kind of word, but like, we can't passively be ingesting media. Like, the idea that it's just entertainment is terrifying. We internalize all of this. It builds our sense of self. It builds our sense of the world. It frames how we understand others. The way we learn about someone impacts how we treat them. So to understand and to teach and to learn how to be actively engaged in the media we consume is the way, I think, is the first step we need.
I wholly endorse that. And the idea of what we do with problematic things, that the whole notion of cancel culture has been on my mind a lot lately. And I've been trying to really understand it. And it seems to me that it's rooted in something that's a positive desire, but has some unintended consequences. I think that a lot of people want to know what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, and align themselves accordingly. And what happens is they want to be able to quickly label something. This is good, this is bad, this is positive, this is problematic, and then kind of disavow or ally themselves with it. And I understand that desire because it's born out of an anxiety, a desire to be good or to be seen as good. But what really ends up happening is it's a way of avoiding moral accountability, of any kind of culpability. I mean, the fact is that we are part of all these things. This is our legacy. We are part of it. And like Sam says, we can't just be passive consumers that just have things labeled good or bad. Those complicated feelings are the very ones that, when we sit with them, are what generate the kinds of thoughts that will give birth to better art, to better representation. So I want to live with that discomfort. That being said, it's quite variable. Like, I love Silence of the Lambs. I love The Crying Game. That's one that has both caused me a lot of direct harm and is what I think is a beautiful film. There are other depictions, I can't even, whenever we show Disclosure, I have to leave the room when we get to the vomiting sequence, particularly like with Ace Ventura. There's certain jokes and things like that, like I don't ever need to see again. And there's other things where there's something beautiful, there's something worth saving in it.
For me, it's kind of like an indication of the work that needs to be done, the work ahead, the fact that we have so much negative depictions out there of trans people and non-binary people is, for me, it's like, oh, okay, well, if there's, 150 of all of that, then, we need to make 300, whatever, just to kind of drown it out. And I think Jen said it very eloquently in Disclosure when, the negative depictions wouldn't matter so much if we had enough, if we had more of, or at least equal to, with some positive representations that's told by us, written by us, and narrated and produced by us. And we're not there yet. And I think that's why there's these feelings of, kind of what Jen was saying, like what's good and what's bad, where I think maybe it wouldn't matter as much if we had at least the space and the opportunity to create what's most accurate.
Can I add one thing to that? Because whenever either of them talk, it gives me so many other ideas. I struggled with this, and it was actually a conversation that evolved between myself and Jen over the years, where in the beginning, she's always said, we just need more. And I was always like, maybe no one knows how to do it. Like, I don't know.
Can we trust people with that?
I don't know if I trust anybody. And then it was like, I don't, I'm sick of the killing and the deaths and the stereotypes and the like one-dimensional characters, but we don't want these like sterilized, perfect, polished images either, because those aren't real. And I finally feel like I'm actually seeing a change. And that was in Veneno. This was the series Veneno, out of Spain, out of Madrid. Finally, yes, trans women do sex work. Trans men do sex work. It's not all we do. And we have community, and we have love, and there's violence, and there's romance. Like, finally, there was a series that could be messy and beautiful and nuanced and complicated. And this is actually like, oh, okay, like we are not just a punchline. We're not just a narrative device. And that's the shift. That's the subtlety that I think is needed to move away from the distortion and the dehumanization that we've seen up until now.
Oh, I love on the off chance that anyone in the audience hasn't seen La Veneno, it's available on HBO in America at least. It's all trans people want to talk. Like, all I want to talk about with all my trans friends and filmmaking friends is Veneno. It is not only the single best depiction of trans women ever, like without even a close second. It's just one of the best TV series I've ever seen. It is an astonishing piece of art on absolutely every single level, and everyone should watch it.
I love this conversation. And, it strikes me in debates about positive versus negative representation, we not only have a gender problem, but we have a genre problem. And so, I wonder if many more dad jokes to come, just to stick. So if we don't want to be the butt of jokes and we don't want to be, scapegoated for the violent fantasies of others, I would love to talk out loud. What is the future of trans comedy? What is the future of trans horror? Rain, I think Razor Tongue is such an incredibly incisive intervention, to come back to Sam's word, into the landscape of transcultural production. Or Jen, I'm thinking about your work with Her Story in particular, about these really incredible moments of intervening upon narrative scripts. Where can we go?
Your word, Chase. You use it all the time.
Go ahead, Rain.
Where can we go? That's such a great question. I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I think there's many avenues where we can go, but what I would like to see is less of our identities being used as a divisive plot point. I think if we start there, then we can really figure out our place in all of these genres. Because I think that there's room for jokes to happen. I think there's room for, comedy or whatever, or anything like that in film and TV. But I think what bothers me the most is when a project is sort of, it's trans and it's this and it's that, and we're going to hire a trans actress, but it's still a divisive plot point, and the creators behind all of it think that they deserve a pat on the back because of this one thing that they decided to do. But honestly, like, that is the minimum. Like, the minimum is to write and center our story and cast the right person to play the role. Like, that's the minimum. I think going beyond that and employing writers within our community and producers as well, so that it's not up to the actor solely to be the voice for this identity or this community. So I think for me, with Razor Tongue, it was an opportunity for me to be experimental with the stories that I want to tell, but also kind of show Hollywood what it would be like to tell this human story and not reveal or share her gender identity until the very last episode. And even when she did, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just like, she just kind of said it like nonchalantly. And it worked. It seemed to have worked. And, it got me the Emmy nomination. And so for me, that experiment kind of gave me hope that people can relate to us regardless of our gender identity or regardless of our experience, as long as the story is rooted in something that every human can relate to. And, because even that character that I played, that I wrote, is, she's messy. She wasn't meant to be likable. But it was nuanced in that way where she got to be funny, she got to be sexy, and she got to be really problematic. And she was calling people out. Like, she was like call out culture, like, the embodiment of it. And then at the end of the series, she had to face some consequences. And so she's not a perfect character, but I think people really liked the idea of it, or at least seeing something that was so different, because what we have seen is kind of what Sam was saying. It's like we don't need like a perfectionist version of who we are. We just need just sort of like a spectrum of storytelling.
Yeah, agreed. I just want to see us everywhere. I mean, really, it really is that simple. Like, when we don't have to have this conversation anymore, when it's irrelevant, then we'll have succeeded. Anything less than that, there's still work to do. That being said, there are some specific areas that I think will someday soon realize that trans people are a kind of goldmine of content that's just waiting waiting to be exploited, because that's what we do. I think comedy, I think horror, sci-fi and fantasy, I think the way that trans people do embody some kind of concern about change, about transformation, about gender, about assigned roles, about social mobility, about consistency of identity, any of these areas which are particularly rich in genre works should absolutely have trans people on all sides of the camera, because there's a lot to be found there.
I'm glad you raised science fiction, because I have a question about
How obscene is it that we have it like every grand future and yet everybody's still just male and female?
Everyone's still cis? What? And talk about, I'm waiting for the version of Stepford Wives where you wake up in a world full of cis people and wonder how that took place. Why is everyone identical to one another? Anyway, I had a question about what made it into the film in terms of the archive that you all built together, in terms of examples of what we might call transmedia, right? Because there's some really interesting inclusions there. My own interest was really piqued because of my own work on the Wachowskis, that you included The Matrix, which is a film that has 0 trans characters and isn't even really overtly about trans anything. Along with the inclusion of talk shows, which are not a Hollywood production, but do an interesting kind of work in the film. People have very different responses to them. So I'm just wondering what is the assembly, what were the assembly instructions for the film in terms of what made it in?
Ultimately my goal, once I was really getting into it, was to have a film that allowed the viewer, both trans and non-trans, to spend 90 minutes in a constant internal dialogue, right? And oh yeah, I remember seeing this, and oh, that was so funny. Oh, ha ha ha. Oh wait, now maybe I understand. Oh, that's painful. It's not just about being PC, but actually that actually hurts people, and has it to have that kind of constant revelation within yourself. And so I felt that way that happens in a movie also kind of happens when we meet someone, when we're making friends, right? We learn through memories, we learn through stories. That's how we get to know each other. We're not starting, this is when I was born, up to the present, and I will take you chronologically through what happened. And so how does that experience of getting to know a new friend through memory, where past and present folds in on itself, how does that translate to telling this story? So that was kind of the framing of it. So that's why it's so based on these anecdotes, right? So there's no clip that isn't stemmed from a personal story. That was one of our, sort of structural rules. We had our issues, we had our touchstones, but everything had to be inspired by a personal story.
Oh, I love that.
It's such a good movie. It's one of these movies where the more you watch it, the more you see. So when it first came out, I saw it 3 times at Sundance, plus we had a screening in LA and then a few festivals after that. And every time I saw it, it's oh shit, I see what he did there. It's Sam does so many subtle things in the film, and the way that he weaves anecdote with story, the way that he sets up something as fun, and then there's a kind of gut punch of the pain that it causes of seeing a piece of beloved media and then seeing the impact it has on a person. He'll seed, some kind of idea or a person in one segment so that they can then be fully centered in a different segment later, but you've already met them. There are so many wonderful subtleties to the film. It's really worth revisiting again and again. I'm a fan.
So we have a Q&A box that's been alive since the start of the chat and popping. And I would love to bring some more voices into the conversation. And thank you to those in the gallery who are continuing to populate the list. We'll do our best to try and cluster some thematics together to make sure that everyone is as satisfied as can be in these technologically dominated times. There's a question here motivated by a recent watching of the Hunter Schafer episode of Euphoria. And the person writing was really excited to see this kind of representation, but also says that it felt very vulnerable making. And the question is about how to support trans artists in the making of this work. And, intimacy coordinators have become popular as a result of Me Too. Is there anything like this for trans actors on set? And maybe that I could add to that question by saying, Sam, I would love if you would speak out loud about some of your on-set methods in the making of disclosure as well.
I will answer that second part because I haven't seen that episode yet. I've read about it. And I don't know, I bet Rain and Jen can speak more about on-set policies. But in terms of, you know, in making the film, there was no way that I wouldn't bring in as many trans people as possible. Not only because that's how the story had to be told, and that there's certain life experiences that you can't translate and tell someone else. It has to come from you and your approach. And so everything, like from how you're lighting and how you're miking somebody to the makeup, like every step of the way, there had to be a trans person influencing that role. So when I couldn't hire a trans person, we had a mentorship program and mentored a trans person. So every role was influenced by someone with a trans life experience. And that not only daily proved to be sort of life-changing for myself and for a lot of people, because this was the first time for so many of us to be in a trans-centered work environment, right? Where you're not constantly looking over your shoulder or realizing you're the only trans person in the room and constantly distracted by what can happen. Like actually now you can just do your job, right? And also it was really important during breaks or any downtime. I would ask other people, like, is there a question you want me to ask in this next interview or something that didn't come up? And because I knew they would have a different perspective. And if this wasn't a room of trans people, I was not going to ask that question, right? So every step of the way, having a set of trans people, you know, created this intimacy that I think really translates to the viewing experience. And then likewise for the people that we were interviewing, same for them. Often they're on a set or on a job where they're the only trans person. And you could literally see sort of a change in expression and a sort of energetically, you could see people just sort of relax when they looked around, they sat down in the interview seat, you know, the lights came on, the room got really quiet, and they looked and saw that our camera person was trans, our PA was trans, our sound person was trans, you know, and to understand that they didn't have to brace themselves for the impending offensive question that would probably come up in every interview they've ever been in. And to also understand that they could have there would be shortcuts to conversations, right? That they were speaking to a knowing group, that the 5 or 6 people that were directly in front of them would be able to relate to what they were talking about. And that again creates a type of intimacy that you can't manufacture otherwise.
I was fortunate enough to work on the set of Transparent for 4 seasons, I think. And it was one of the rare utopian transcentric shows I've ever been on. There was trans people employed in every department, and there was literally like this hierarchy. There was me, but then there was trans directors, there was actors, as well as producers. Zachary Drucker and Reese Ernst, who really created this culture where if a cis ally crew member was on set, if they didn't know how to approach one of the trans people on set, we literally just created like an open trans one-on-one and just kind of set up a bunch of like meetings and gatherings where we can talk openly about how to talk to one another, how to use the right pronouns and how to address someone by their name and how to be respectful. And so yes, I think, I don't know, in regards to that intimacy coordinator question, that there is a possibility to have something like that for trans people on set, because I have seen it myself on Transparent. And I think it really does start at the top. I think it really did make such a difference that Zachary and Reese were producers of that show, because they had power to start those conversations and create those bridges between people who may not know how to address someone who is trans, or may not know how to not offend them, so to speak. And it allowed for us to really work in harmony and really see each other as equals most of the time. on set. So yes, there to that question, there is that possibility.
I don't have a whole lot to add except just a couple of quick, really practical things, which GLAAD often does sensitivity training for shows ahead of trans actors coming on or there being a trans storyline. Nick Adams, who heads all the trans programming at GLAAD, has been there for 20 years and is a trans man and is absolutely incredible. And so they're very good at that. Increasingly, shows will also hire trans consultants to come on when they're handling trans issues and they just want to make sure that they're doing it right. Those are two areas that are very practical where things are definitely getting better. I need to say one more thing about Sam, though, and about transparent, because a thought occurred to me the other day, Sam, that for some reason hadn't really explicitly come into my head yet, because I've talked a lot in other interviews about how the atmosphere that Sam created on set did exactly what he said. It put all of us at ease. We could be at our best. But another thing just occurred to me, that every single person you see on Disclosure, every single time that they're talking, every single person, they're talking to Sam. And like that's it, because Sam's never in the film, it's easy to forget that he's a part of that. But that entire film is really a conversation between us and Sam. And so as much as Sam did to create the environment, ultimately it was because, like, in my most vulnerable moments in the film and Rain's most vulnerable moments, we're just having a one-on-one conversation with Sam. Mm-hmm. So in addition to the environment, it was his empathy, it was his compassion, it was the shared language that we have with him, like his ability to hold space for us and the questions to have and the flow of the conversation. It's the kind of skill that you don't notice when it's good. It's the kind of thing that becomes invisible. And Sam did a very good job of making himself invisible. But it's nice for us to occasionally remember that whole conversation is with Sam.
That's a great thing to note. I wanted to also mention to all three of you that in the chat, we have many expressions of thanks and just gushing about how important this film has been for different people that aren't even questions. They're just like, thank you from all over the continent and globe. One thing one question that is getting to a topic Chase and I actually wanted to raise, so I'll just let the voice of the questioner come through here, is Jen, in the film, you say that in response to bad representation, we need more representation, right? Which goes to what Rain was saying about kind of drowning out certain legacies. But that also raises a question about the kind of visibility, vulnerability paradox that the film starts with. So this questioner wants to ask about, will more representation ultimately bring more risk at the same time? And then what happens next? Like people know us and then they decide they don't like us, right? So do you have any thoughts about where we might be headed with like increased visibility in the community?
It's temporary. I'm sorry, but that blowback is temporary. Trans people were largely invisible in mainstream culture for a lot of people. And then we became visible. That happened to correspond, like what Sam said, with the rise of kind of reactionary populism and conservatism in America. And trans people became a flashpoint because in our very bodies, we represent a kind of changing consensus around social identity, which is very disruptive to the kind of norms that make conservatives much more comfortable moving through the world. So it's very threatening. It's temporary. Like it's a phase that we have to go through. Eventually, we just become part of the fabric of society, at which point it's not trans people, it's that trans person. Like maybe I hate that trans person, maybe I love that trans person, but it becomes more specific, which isn't to say that violence will stop. I mean, the issue underneath the violence against trans women specifically is rooted in toxic masculinity, white supremacy, and misogyny, all of those things, and homophobia. Like it's a heady stew, and vulnerable trans women happen to stand at the worst possible intersection of all of those factors. And no amount of media representation can change that. Media that addresses those underlying issues can do that, but that's going to be a long process. But in terms of trans people being the kind of flashpoint, I don't think we're through it yet, but I do think there is another side.
Can I add to that?
No, let's move on.
I wasn't asking. So two things. I mean, we also know that as soon as gay marriage became, accessible, then trans people became the scapegoat, right? That we know that has to hold. We have to be honest about that. And also, part of making this film was that idea of whenever a marginalized community gets mainstream attention, backlash ensues. And I wanted to figure out, is there a way for that not to happen? Right. So, Jen is such an Aquarius. She's like, yes, this is how it is. And it's just what it's going to be. And, and, I'm a feely Cancer and I want it to be different. And like, how can we do it differently? And so I don't know yet, but that's part of this investigation. That's part of this question of like, what can social justice movements do differently? Because we need to be seen. Like, putting Hollywood aside, we need role models. We need to be mirrored. We need to be reflected. We need representation in whatever form that takes. But what can social justice movements do differently, knowing that once you get seen, there's going to be an uptick in violence? So that's the question I have.
I wonder if we could talk about disclosure and its aftermath. There is a robust and ongoing impact campaign, of which I would place this conversation. And the project is so deeply rooted in social justice. Sam, and perhaps Jen and Rain, if you have the info, what is happening with the film now? Where are we going? Do you imagine the film to have a life in rooms, in schools? Where are the social justice components now that the set is technically closed?
Who you ask?
Sam, you're the only one who can really answer that one. Holy.
Yes, we have. The impact campaign is really, really, really exciting. I mean, obviously we wanted to impact the entertainment industry, and that happened so quickly. I never imagined it would happen that quickly. Immediately Jen was telling me about, all these messages she was getting. One was Ryan Reynolds, right? And Ryan Reynolds, is that his name, Jen? I didn't even know he was, but apparently he's just like,
yeah. He's all up in my DMs now.
Jen and Laverne, and talking about how he will never look at film and TV the same way, right? He will never make film and TV the same way. And then he created his own fellowship program. Like, this was days after we premiered. And so seeing people in positions of power and decision-making positions talk about how this is changing the way they see film and TV was mind-blowing. I mean, that took me a really long time to understand and wrap my head around. And then hearing about casting agents telling trans people, have you seen Disclosure yet? Right? Like, seeing that, right? I've heard about scripts that have been written and ready to go that, the showrunner saw Disclosure and had to go back in and redo things. And this, and I've been trying to understand, like, what was different, what made people feel that confidence and empowerment and responsibility, right? Because I think, as I was saying earlier, like, I don't think anyone goes into telling stories, that goes into the arts thinking they want to make life more difficult for people, right? We all go into this actually thinking we can make the world a better place. And so suddenly there's this tool that people now understand that maybe they can make up for mistakes they've made in the past and do it better. And that's been incredibly exciting. Off the screen, what's really, been so meaningful to my activist roots is hearing about, like, a group of judges from California. They asked if they could use clips from Disclosure to educate one another about the biases they might hold towards people in the courtroom. Like, now we're talking about life and death. So that's where I'm really excited and passionate about seeing that work. I heard about a lawyer at the ACLU who told Chase Strangio, who's in our film, who's, famous trans lawyer, they told him that they watched Disclosure to prepare an argument for one of their trans clients, right? To be able to argue about, again, the bias and stereotypes that the jury might hold when learning about this client. That's amazing to me. It was so heartbreaking to have the pandemic shut down all of our public screenings and traveling around the world. But then on the flip side of that, to have Netflix, to know that this film could be seen in homes where people might not be able to afford a ticket to a film festival, might not even know a film festival was happening. All around the world, people were now getting access to see this, whether it was borrowing their friends, streaming password, or paying the $8 a month to see it. So that campaign of getting into people's homes around the globe that might not have access and have these community conversations in schools, in high schools, in colleges, in community centers, partnering with small festivals. And so the work is going on. I've also been asked to come and do, like, DEI training, which was never something I thought, but turns out it's very lucrative. And they wanted to talk about our production model. And I was just like, they want to know how to do it. And that's incredible. I never imagined that would happen, right? That I'd be going and telling people how to run their ship, like how to tell these corporate people how to hire trans people. And to me, it's really basic. It's like you have a party, you want people to come to your party, you invite them. That's the same thing. You want trans people in your employment, you have to go and invite them because we don't think we're welcome. Again, by choice or circumstance, we often hold ourselves back because we don't think we're welcome or we've had bad experiences. So, our impact campaign is about DEI training in the corporate world and in organizations. It's high school education. It's the industry. It's the judicial system.
Wow.
And
we only have a couple minutes left. Sorry.
Dozens of panels this past year. They've been representing the film nonstop, which I'm so grateful for. Rain and Jim.
That's fantastic. We only have a couple minutes left, but wanted to make sure to
speed round. Let's just speed round all the questions.
Whether they have any exciting things they're working on, or things they want to point us toward, or just hopes for the future.
Yes, many exciting things. Yes, and I can't talk about any of it, but it's all very big and very cool.
It's under lock and key. We'll be waiting for it. We're so eager.
Rain, anything?
Yeah, there's a lot happening, a lot going on, which is awesome. A lot of irons in the fire, but same. I don't think I can talk about anything right now. But the cool thing is, disclosure has made such a positive impact on my career, my livelihood, my relationships with my family. And so, that's just something that I just was completely pleasantly surprised by. I just I was like, I like Sam. I like everybody involved. I'm going to do this thing. I got to go to Sundance and, wasn't really expecting much from it. I just loved the project, but definitely a lot of gains, which is something that I'm just eternally grateful to you. So
you got those free Lyft rides at Sundance, which I am so jealous. I remain jealous. Lyft saw that she was going to Sundance and they were like, we will give you free rides. I mean, who gets that? That's like, I was so jealous.
Hey, I got a Pizza Hut beanie and bomber and socks because of Sundance. So lots of material benefits to disclosure here.
Living the dream.
Parents respond to that experience watching Soap Dish? Did they remember? Was there a conversation around that?
What's the question?
Yeah, no, because you said it changed. You mentioned your family, so your family watched the film, and there's that scene where you talk about watching Soap Dish. That's right. That was the film. Did you all talk about that again?
Yes. I had my sister who was in the room, and my younger brother who was in the room when it happened, and my cousin. And so I spoke to my sister about it first, and then my brother, and then my cousin in the Philippines, and but they reached out to me, which was kind of, and they said they remembered that moment. They apologized. They said they didn't know. They knew how they felt about it, but they didn't know how. They didn't care to ask how I felt about it. And they also knew the consequences, because literally that following Monday, suddenly I was wearing masculine gendered clothes in school, like just 2 days after we watched that movie. And it wasn't me, and I was super unhappy, but it was something I had to do because, I had decision makers in my life, which were my parents. And nobody had my back. And so they reached out and said that they were sorry that they didn't know what to do.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. We unfortunately have to wrap. We want to thank all of you so much for your work and your time this evening with us in the audience. I want to close by reading a comment from the chat that I think is related to what Rain just said in terms of the transformative work this film is doing. This is from a person who writes, "My 24-year-old trans daughter and I watched Disclosure together, and it was an amazing thing for us to do. Thank you so much." So thank you very much for all your
Thank
work.
you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to say thank you to Sam and to Rain and to Jen and Chase and Kyle, all of you. It's been fascinating. It's been a great conversation. Your wonderful personalities shine through, which makes it that much nicer to watch and listen to. So thank you very much for joining us. But more importantly, thank you for the work that you do, making this film and all the other work that you do in going in the past and going in the future, because obviously there's lots more coming. So you're changing hearts and minds, you're changing the world, and our hats are off to you. So thank you so much.